you mentioned Snowflake, right? Has been the emergence of two categories of players. One is more data oriented, so Snowflake, Palantir, C3, etc. And then the other category is vertical players, so Teladoc and telemedicine, nCino in banking, Shopify redefining e-commerce. It's not just, a lot of merchants don't want to work with Amazon. They've gone to Shopify, right? So are we seeing a little inflection point in the industry? Are these new players changing of the guard? Or are they going to be M&A fodder for some of the bigger guys?
Yeah, Vinnie, could I add a third piece in that to what you just mentioned? That is, right, how many years was it ago that Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world? And then we started to hear, every company's a software company. Well, every company used software, but they weren't a software company. But more and more today, that's happening. So if every company in 2021 is more or less a software company, what then is the role of Workday, Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, and these others that, hey, wait, I'm a software company. Well, they have to change. They have to up their game and roll that around some too. So the industry-specific plays that you mentioned, I think, are going to be enormously powerful. You get these companies like Snowflake and Palantir come in, and they're just disrupting not so much the industry, but they're disrupting the expectations of customers, right? I don't have to do it that way. I don't have to try to take the tech industry's way of doing stuff and impose it on my business when I want to do some things that the tech industry didn't do before. So I think these, what's that thing, Vinny, in the middle of a washing machine? Is it agitator, right? I think
it's a great term.
We've got these, they're not just disruptors, but they're constant agitators coming in saying, the way you got to here will not take you there. And we all, as in the tech industry and as business people, better understand that, because that line between the tech companies and the non-tech companies, that's fuzzing. Then who's a software company, who's a hardware company, that's fuzzing. Database, not. Platform, this, that, up, down, industry solutions. Yeah, it is going to be a wildly different landscape. And if I could draw any better than, my drawing is at best cave art, but it would be fun to try to picture graphically somehow, what's this evolution going to be like? And if you're a CEO in the pharmaceutical or the logistics business, how do you see your company within the emerging tech world, and what choices do you have that are wildly different in 2021 than they were just 2 years ago, Vinny? So think about how different, again, they're going to be in 2022. So to me, it's not so much the managers who can take what I did last year and do it a little bit better for a nickel less, but it's going to be these wild-eyed innovators. So
that headbutting, in my view, is over, right? So everybody under the cloud is using the public cloud and is using the AI mechanisms, right? There's no way that an application SaaS company can, say, compete with Google, who's on this fourth generation of putting algorithms on silicon from a speed, from a cost perspective, from an ecosystem perspective. So that is clear. All SaaS will be running on not just one public cloud, which many people tried to get away 2-3 years ago, but by now it's clear because of geography, because of preferences, because of data gravity. It's very hard to move data between the different clouds. Large enough SaaS vendors have to support multiple clouds, and their differentiation is going to be, I can run on multiple clouds and I provide the value-added services across those multiple clouds.
And so what does that do to the application vendors? Go back to focus on functionality, or still try to have their platforms?
No, they will have their platforms for building applications, which need to be abstracted to run on multiple clouds in an as efficient way. So there's no cost of migrating. Remember the old times when you had to migrate to a different platform, or databases would be only available in half a year after they go live on this one, then on this platform. Those times are over, right? Nobody has time for that enterprise acceleration again. But the good news is it means focus on business best practices. And that's where application vendors have to do a lot of work, because right now, it's terrible to be a standard application software vendor, because the new capabilities of the cloud, I call it infinite computing, have changed business best practices from a potential what can be done. The problem is the business users do not know how that process looks like, right? I mean, you were at Sapphire last year, right? Hasso Plattner, he told me the story many times. I worked for him at SAP, right, privately, but finally he said it publicly. He said it was easy to build R2, their mainframe software. He would sit next to the finance director of ICI, chemical company, their launch customer. He would tell them how he does it. He would at night program it on the mainframe. It was done, right? It was a compromise, right? The business unit would say, this is what I would like. The trusted technology would find the best way how the technology could support it. Now we've passed this inflection point where technology can do more than what our existing best practices, business processes do and can do. And this is where creativity is there. This is why I say we're in the second mainframe era, right? In the first mainframe era, you would buy the hardware. And if you negotiate hard with IBM, they would give you developer years for free because there was no software, right? Then standard software caught up because it was clear enough where technology is. And now technology can do more, and it's not clear how you're going to do business. And it's very, very hard for any standard software vendor right now.
And Holger, I've been trying to make this point not quite as well as you. I've been telling application vendors they don't have enough functional specialists. That's not a skill they necessarily recognize. The architects, they keep pitching their machine learning, they keep pitching their UX. It's all architectural components. They don't really lead with business process. So maybe you'll see us.
You make a great point, right? The problem at the standard application vendors is that they always have been listening to the customers. Customer advisory was telling them what to do. That worked for a long time. Right now, their customers don't know what they will be doing. So it has to turn around. You need to have visionaries. You need to have people who have guts to say, this is how you have to do finance, HR, manufacturing based on these capabilities, and take risks. Because if it's wrong, fail fast and build it another way. And that's what I'm not seeing from any of the SaaS vendors right now. And this is why I'm happy that they don't have to worry about platform anymore and can really focus on applications and come up with a vision how companies should be run.
I had a conversation with one of the current Gartner analysts, arguing about low code and no code. And this particular analyst does not believe in low code, no code. He thinks there is the necessary IT discipline that, you don't replace finance people. He says you don't replace IT people. I am actually a huge fan of low code and no code. It reminds me that back in the day when I started, and you and I started a little bit earlier, so maybe some of the audience, back in the 90s, I remember when people still had secretaries print out their emails. They scribed on the email a response, and there were secretaries sending the response back on email, and that was the norm early 90s, and then it of course changed. And I think we look at some of these technologies like maybe this person looked at email saying, oh, that's such an advanced technology, I don't need to use it. There are people that are specialized in using it. I'm seeing this everywhere. So obviously video is, it's nice of you to say that, but video is one of the areas where it became obviously mainstream. We have, a whole millennial generation authoring videos where before that people didn't have that or couldn't do that. But I'm seeing this everywhere. I think there's a huge movement of democratizing technology creation. So if you get beyond, so I'm thinking about like application integration. I mean, so many people use Zapier, for example, or IFTTT, right, for their own use of creating the connections between apps that don't exist. And that's a small example of, I think, what's going to happen in personal automation. So obviously we in the enterprise automation space, but I'm seeing a lot of personal automation happen with a variety of tools, which could really help people create their own workflows that are not prescribed by vendors or companies. So I'm big on that. I think I'm seeing like people use their own analytics now, but starting with Airtable, but Power BI is not a big barrier. So you can have this end user driven thing, and anybody who's an IT person listening saying that's the worst thing that can happen, that's shadow IT. But I think shadow IT is what's going to happen more and more, and the shadow IT becomes professionals and people, and I think IT organizations need to create those guardrails with technology that allow this to happen, because the power of this is huge. We're still living in a massive IT backlog world. I'm seeing this as one of the things we didn't talk about happen digital, and IT had this long backlog. So there's this project they were going to do in 2022, but now they had to do it now. So there's always going to be IT backlog. So I think citizen automation or citizen coding, citizen programs, I think can help companies grow. And I think it just helps the end users, because the apps are never quite to their taste. If they're never quite quite this. So I don't know if you may remember back when I was at SAP, and a lot of people created Lotus Notes. Can't believe I'm saying this. Lotus Notes front ends to SAP because SAP was not the UI they wanted. And I think similar things will happen. I think there are going to be applications. Maybe we'll do our own Alexa skills. And I'm big on that, and I use a couple of tools myself that are no code, and there are huge players now. OutSystems, for example, they're going to be in this space.
The book is all about complex systems and applying the notion of complex systems and complexity theory to startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I hadn't planned to have it come out in the midst of this collision of multiple complex systems, right? The healthcare crisis, COVID, is a complex system. And much of the language of complexity is in health, right? Emergent behavior, contagion, phase shifts, delays, positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops. Like, these are all language associated with what's actually happening. Economic crisis is a complex system. The mental health crisis, which ensues from the fact that we're stuck in our houses 24 hours a day and are just fundamentally not prepared and used to this kind of dynamic, is also a complex system. It's not that there's a deterministic end state. There's all these different things that are interacting with each other all along the way that are non-deterministic and non-predictable. And yet, as humans, we want to predict, and we want to say, this is what's happening, and this is what the answer is, and this is what we need to do. The media is a really interesting side effect of this that then plays into the system. So, the media theoretically is observing and analyzing and explaining what's happening. That theoretically. I think anybody that pays attention to contemporary media, I don't pay much, but like today, the dynamics around contemporary media are much more blurry, especially with misinformation, especially with social network promotion of information to different categories, filter bubbles, like long list of things that people have been talking about for the last 3 or 4 years. If you look at that now and you think about human beings, there is no source of truth. They don't start by saying, this is a hypothesis, or this is an observation, or this is what we're worried about in this moment, and this is how the things are linked together. They say, this is the truth. Yeah. This is what's happening. And so then as humans, the stimuli that we get is, this is the truth, this is what's happening, rather than inputs into our own critical thinking. That's always gone on, but it's so amplified in this moment.
Explain to me something that is, to me is very frustrating, because I've been in the enterprise world and we've talked about books of record, right? Mm-hmm. Single source of truth and so on. This is a year where analytics should have really taken off, right? We have all kinds of Johns Hopkins data. We have all kinds of polling data. We have census data. Mm-hmm. Shortened seasons, sports seasons. So, new stats. I mean, I wrote a note where I had like 12 different new data streams that have emerged in different ways, right? And yet, we've ended up with selective reporting of data. I mean, you talk about a knowledge graph. Where is it breaking down where people are not getting a complete picture? Because, like the pandemic, you live in Texas, I live in Florida. A lot of focus has been on the number of positives going up. But the number of hospitalization and fatalities have been going down, right? But it seems like that hasn't come out much. The media is mostly focused on the positives going up. So where is it breaking down that we're not getting a complete picture?
Well, so it actually is not as easy as you'd think historically to pull a bunch of disparate data sources together. And, there's lots of studies on this that a lot of business analyses require, 5, 7 different types of sources, and they're all coming from different places. And there's been many attempts at this over the years. There's been data lakes and, sure, what Cloudera and Hadoop did. There's been many, of course, it started back in the day with Oracle and, building large data warehouses and data marts and, large databases. But there haven't been, there's several things happening. So first of all, you have a proliferation of data sources happening At the same time that the industry has really been wired for IT and very heavy implementations and lots of consulting hours, and therefore a lot of slowness to get to anything kind of complete. And this kind of vision of we'll throw it all in the data lake. All data lake projects fail. That's what we now know about data lakes. And then they tend to be super technical when they work and not very accessible to the large part of the organization. So therefore they become very gated by IT. And it's not like IT is like trying to throw up these gates. It's just, these are the tools that they have. And they're very technical tools. They were created by IT people for IT people. And so the challenge when we started data.world was twofold. First of all, we wanted to create a place where everybody in the world could go and share open data. Okay, and we've grown as fast as GitHub grew in its early years. We've become now the world's largest collaborative data community. People collaborate on data.world every day around climate change, cancer, COVID-19, nutrition, poverty, you name it. It's really amazing what happens on our platform. Every day you can get a high just watching what people are doing. And they're doing all that for free. Over 2/3 of the Fortune 500 use data.world for free for open data. Well, that exposes them to the power of it and the power of a knowledge graph. And then we come along and say, by the way, you can do this for your private data and your business and use that same power. And there's a lot of technology that we have that you're not using today because we don't expose everything for free. And that's when we sign a customer that tends to be a Fortune 500 type customer. And if you go to the average Fortune 500 company and you say, where's your data? You're going to get an answer that it's spread out among 30 plus different sources. I mean, and then, you know, if you add up the spreadsheets that everybody's working on, then you create thousands of additional sources. And you say, well, how are you putting all that together so that people can really work with it? And you start to hear the same stories that you've heard forever. Well, we're doing a data lake project and we'll be done in a couple of years. Or we've just signed with Snowflake and, you know, we're going to put it on a big Snowflake data warehouse. And we love Snowflake. We're actually the only data catalog that's natively integrated with Snowflake. We're software as a service and cloud native. They're software as a service and cloud native. And they're a great partner of ours. But, you know, even Snowflake's not going to capture everything. There's still going to be a lot in your SaaS applications that you need to have access to, like Salesforce. So there's going to be a lot in spreadsheets. And so that was the design challenge of data.world. How do we bring all this together? And then how do we make the interface accessible to literally anybody in the company, not just the IT people, so that everybody can work with data? And how do we do it at a cost that makes it very accessible, where we can scale very quickly to tens of thousands of people at these companies and help them transform the way they actually operate the business and become much more data-driven? So, you know, to your point, the reality is that even though we're in 2020, data, believe it or not, is one of the least networked resources we have in the world.
Let me take you into another opportunity area, right? So, you know, through this whole process, I live in Florida, and, you know, we are used to the National Hurricane Center. I've written case studies about them. The cone of uncertainty has become smaller and smaller because, you know, they get so much data from buoy sensors and hurricane hunters and satellites and so on, and the supercomputers that churn out the models. So we're used to evacuating maybe 200 miles of coastline when a hurricane's approaching. We don't evacuate the whole state. In the pandemic model, it seems like, A, we've evacuated way too much, and B, it's been unreliable, right? So we turned Javits in New York into a hospital. We sent the emergency Navy ship there. And within 4 weeks, we said, oh, maybe we don't need them. I mean, it's just been chaotic.
Yeah.
How do we put your broader planning hat on? How do we do a better job next time there is a pandemic or another health-related issue? And where would you play a role in something like that?
think it's a multifaceted and very complex question here, and I imagine there's going to be, and I hope there are going to be bipartisan inquiries, not Senate hearings and things like that. I really think that the magnitude of this, the scale of it for a health issue, the impact to society and every level is so big and so different that we really need to come together as a nation and as a world, in fact, and actually get bipartisan answers to these problems, right? I think a lot of folks in your audience might share this view that there's far too much partisanship and politicization of these things. And we need to get beyond that quickly. That's the first comment I'd make. The second is we're going to have a trove of data to go through. And I would say that experts that know how to analyze data need to spend a lot of time. It could be another year until we get some conclusions. Because what I've found is that it seems to change week to week in the way that data gets shared, right? So by the time it comes from the source and it eventually ends up at our eyeballs, it's been passed through so many different places and through the media and everything else, it's hard to actually understand what works. I'll give you an example which I think everyone would resonate with. Why is it that today in June, nearly end of June, so this has been around since February, right? Why is it today that the authorities saying we need you wearing masks, we need you to wear face coverings? Why wasn't that known beforehand? Coronaviruses have been around. SARS-1 was in early 2000. We've had, the common cold is a coronavirus. Now, of course, it's rarer to have novel coronaviruses, but don't we know that transmission through from our respiratory systems, transmission is more likely to happen if you're not wearing a face covering? Like, why didn't we know that before? So these are the things that I think need to be answered.